Getting stuck in the mud is so frustrating. Your tires are spinning, but the only thing moving is the mud that gets thrown behind your car. And the more you press on the gas pedal, hoping to free your car, the deeper you sink. You feel so helpless. Grief can be like that too, especially when your loss is sudden or traumatic. There's so much to process. So many unexpected decisions you have to make in a short period of time, all while your loss still seems so unreal. Recognizing if you're getting stuck in your grief and figuring out some strategies for getting unstuck is our topic today. Welcome to Grief Share.
We had driven out here to sign the papers on our house. We drove from Wyoming to Oregon, and about an hour from Jackson, we stopped for gas, and I went in to use the restroom, and I came out, and he had collapsed by the side of the car. I was completely taken aback by how overwhelming grief can be, how it can consume all of you. During that first year, I did everything I thought I was supposed to. I moved out here, moved into the house. Al and I had talked about building a retaining wall in the backyard and making it more of a yard. And so my son and I put a retaining wall in. We had always dreamed about taking our family on a trip. So we made the plans and took all 11 of us to Hawaii. And then it was getting close to the anniversary of my husband's death. And I suddenly realized I didn't have any more plans. I'd run out of things that I knew I was supposed to do. I would get up in the morning and I would do, work in my yard or take care of the house. But I really didn't have a purpose. And I would sit at his desk and just cry. I just couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do with my life. My daughter, she's a child and family counselor, and she called me and she said, "Mom, I think you're getting stuck. I think you need to find a support group."
This testimony provides a good example of what we mean by stuck in grief, what professionals sometimes call complicated or prolonged grief. If you're going through complicated grief, then you've gotten stuck in some ruts along your journey with grief. So recognizing where those ruts are is important for every griever. Here are some common ruts to watch out for along the way.
I remember going to the mailbox, getting mail, and every day there were fewer cards, and every day I was drifting from God. And there was community, but I didn't want to reach out to it. I just started getting more and more and more depressed, and so much so that I was almost not able to care for Katie. I did not know what to do. I didn't want to live, honestly. Every day was gray. Life was depressing. I didn't want to talk to anybody.
Life may slow down, certainly after significant loss. The normalcy of life is going to change, but it gets unhealthy when it comes to a point where normal functions cannot continue.
When you're not able to see yourself living beyond that moment where it's impacting your work, impacting your other relationships, impacting your ability to find pleasure in pleasurable things that you used to for a protracted period of time, then it's too much. There's the constant recall, not just of the memory of the loss, but the pain associated with it.
One of the most common ways people remain stuck in their grief is by numbing the pain or simply ignoring it.
I was 16, was at church one night waiting on services to start, and a police officer came in and pulled me from the service. Whenever we walked out on the steps, he looked at my parents and said, Mr. and Miss Cockrell, we regret to inform you that your son was found dead in his apartment earlier today. We did the visitation the day before the funeral, and my mom had a real breakdown. Like, she just kind of fell, onto the floor. As a 16-year-old, I just remember that very vividly. There was a pastor who was close by who pulled my brother and I into another room, and he said, listen, your mom is clearly really struggling with this, and you boys really need to be there for her. You really need to be strong for her. And the best way you can do that is just don't let her see you cry. If you let her see you cry, it's just gonna upset her even more. So I did that. The days and even years that followed after his death, it was an exercise for me in how do I detach from my emotions so that I don't have to feel the pain of that, for fear that I would make things worse. And I loved that pastor, respected that pastor, had no doubt in my mind that it was a statement made out of ignorance. But out of ignorance or not, it didn't change the fact that it had a profound impact on me for about the next 8 years of my life. It was impacting how I thought about myself. It was impacting how I thought about God. It was impacting how I thought about the world around me. It most especially was impacting how I thought about my wife and our relationship and how close I could allow her to get to me. I had an inability to engage her, had an inability to empathize, with her because of my own emotional shutdown.
After having 2 miscarriages, Michelle faced trouble in the 12th week of her 3rd pregnancy.
When I went home, I didn't have any idea what to do. I was a robot, really, in that moment. And so I think it was a few months before I returned to work. I tried to work at home, but my mind just wasn't in it. And then a couple of years kept going, and I kept feeling worse, and it kept getting darker.
Depending on that intensity of the loss and the intensity of those emotions experienced, for some people, they're too overwhelming. And that may be scary to deal with. And so the tendency may be to either numb those feelings and those reactions or to run away from them. And I have seen people, those who engage in excessive buying, they end up having financial difficulties. Those who engage in excessive eating, they begin to gain weight and have health problems. Those who engage in alcohol abuse, and that brings another layer of complications because alcohol is a depressant. You will get further sadness and further depression, which is more complicated.
After the death of her son, Nan tried to numb her intense pain using alcohol and prescription sleeping pills.
At first, it was just a small way to cope and to relax, and then it got into something that I was hiding from the rest of my family and hiding from my friends, hiding from my entire community. And I would say it was a dark, dark 8 years.
As painful as it is, dealing with the reality of the loss is a lot healthier because there are healthy coping mechanisms and coping strategies and healthy ways of managing those experiences and feelings in order to help us to overcome and move forward.
Getting stuck in grief is especially common with traumatic losses that are sudden, unexpected, or violent.
My relationship with my business partner, Eddie, on a personal level was very close. We constantly were doing things together outside of our professional jobs, helping each other with our home projects and going to parties together. On an early spring day in 1985, we loaded up the truck and headed out to do some routine maintenance on a 250-foot cable TV tower. And he was working up at about the 125-foot level. About that point in time, a strong gust of wind blew in from nowhere, and the limb that they were cutting cracked and fell the wrong way right on top of the guy wires. It shook and pulled that tower so hard that the tower kinked in the middle and started to collapse. He wound up falling 125 feet to the ground. I ran up the hill to where Eddie had fallen and immediately started to do CPR, but it was evident that his internal injuries were too great and basically just wound up dying in my arms. I knew nothing about handling grief, especially with a traumatic event like that. I was angry, I was bitter, and I had so much guilt because I didn't stop him from going up. And I just didn't know how to handle it. The anger was so strong, and the guilt of this happening right in front of me just didn't allow me to concentrate enough to even work. All I could do each night is drink, and that was it.
That evening, he had kind of picked a fight with me, and I was a little upset, and so I decided to leave and walk the dog. I was gone for about an hour. When I returned home, I noticed his phone was there, his car was there, our other dog was there, but I couldn't find him. And that's when, searching all rooms of the house. And then lastly, I checked our master closet, and that's where I found him. I never thought in a million years that when I left an hour prior, that would be the last time I would see my husband alive. The shock still affects me to this day.
When a loved one has been taken from us by unexpected and traumatic means, it just hurts us to the core. And I think as a result, what we see after traumatic death is that the grief becomes complicated. People can get stuck in their grief and unable to move towards eventual healing and acceptance and have grief for a prolonged period of time. There's also a really high incidence afterwards of post-traumatic stress disorder. People can struggle with nightmares, flashbacks, and it can wound us very, very deeply.
It's still to this day very hard for me to be in that part of my home, just because I do get flashbacks when I'm in there, just because it was such a traumatic visual.
This whole event affected me so deeply that I couldn't hold a job. I had no desire to try to hold a job. I couldn't concentrate enough to do that. I had a lot of nightmares that plagued me for a long time. I've been a Christian all my life, but I didn't go to God. I chose isolation. I withdrew from my friends, and I suffered alone for almost 9 years.
You might be able to get your car unstuck from a muddy rut by using a blanket or towel behind the stuck tire to provide some traction. Getting unstuck from the ruts along your grief journey also requires getting some traction. And that will involve examining what you're thinking about yourself, God, and your loss.
Life is more than a series of events that are unrelated. We begin to realize how much we make meaning of the events of our life.
We wake up and it might be raining out, it might be sunny. We say, for a farmer and it's raining, we say it's a nice day. If we had a picnic plan that day, we say it's a lousy day, We put interpretation onto events. I've given a trivial example. You take something serious though, like a devastating loss, and you realize that every one of your reactions arises from an interpretation.
And so my experience of grief is shaped by the thinking that I bring to it. Let's say I conclude that God doesn't love me, or God isn't faithful to his promises. Is that not going to shape my future life? It absolutely will. If I've drawn some bad conclusions, then tomorrow I make bad assumptions, which will lead to the formation of bad decisions.
It's at these moments in our lives where we have to confront our feelings and speak to our feelings. When we're going through grief, we're very vulnerable. And that's when you have to take what is true, despite how you feel, and start speaking to your heart.
Think about what you had and what you have ahead, not what you've lost. And that was a really good reminder to me over and over, to not grieve over what I no longer had, but to be grateful over what I had and what was ahead that I still didn't know about.
In some ways, I almost felt like it was a slap in the face of God. If I said, no, I'm going to stay stuck here, I'm not going to move forward. Because God had a plan for me, and I wanted to know what it was. And so it was a gradual progression. And it took action on my part, too. I couldn't just sit still.
I was actually on my way to a grief share meeting, and I had my Christian radio on in the car, and the music came on, and it was a song called "I Will Serve You While I'm Waiting," and it just hit me. I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not supposed to be wallowing in sorrow the rest of my life. God left me here for a purpose, and that purpose is to serve him. However he chooses to have me do that, I need to be willing and ready. It was around that same time that I recognized so wholeheartedly that my husband was a gift to me. And I was blessed with 34 years of being with him. And to start seeing that as a treasure in my life instead of something that was taken from me, I saw it so much as a blessing. And that's the part of my story that, another part that just gets me moving forward. Now I know I have a purpose. I have to figure out what it is, but I'm going to move on and serve God in some way.
Regardless of the ruts that might have you stuck in grief, changing your perspective, your expectations, or the focus of your thoughts will give you traction. One way to change your thinking is to renew your confidence in God's care and concern for you.
I was so just devastated at how unhealthy I was, how dark it was. I had not picked up a Bible in a couple of years, but that day I went home and something inside of me just said, pick up your Bible and read it. And when I opened it up, it was to Ezekiel 37, chapter 37. And my eyes fell right on, I will put breath back into you and you will breathe again. And I remember those words had me take a deep breath, because in that moment I realized I had been the walking dead for probably 6 years. And so I went to sleep that night and I woke up and I said, I've got to get back to my Bible. So as I started to read through Job and Ezekiel and Lamentations, I literally came alive, because I thought, wait, I am in such good company. These guys are a hot mess. They are so messed up, depressed, busted, and disgusted. And I am not alone. I didn't have to be any certain way to be in the presence of God. He's God. However I am doesn't knock him off his throne. Whoever I am doesn't lessen him. And so just one day at a time, one step at a time, I fell back in love with Jesus, but at a much more real, deeper level compared to what it was.
I think the switch occurred when I had gotten to the end of what I could do. It's only so much of isolation you can do, so much of numbing you can do, so much of anger you can do. And I was so bound up in that, in the fear and the anxiety, that I'd gotten to the end of it. I mean, I had hit rock bottom. I was laid out on a yoga mat thinking I'd do yoga to help me that day. And I lay there for 2 hours and cried out to him and said, I know I haven't surrendered my grief. I know I haven't surrendered my anger. I know I haven't surrendered a lot of things to you. I'm going to surrender my life to you now. Will you have me? Can you walk me out of this darkness? And I just felt, after that 2 hours of just crying out to him, I felt as if he was saying, I've been here all along. And I'm here to redeem all of this pain.
I blamed myself a lot because I was the one that said, let's not climb the tower until the work is done on the trees. And he decided to do it anyway. I should have gone and said, no, let's wait. But I didn't. So I blamed myself. And I wasn't in a frame of mind to go to God with this and say, help me. One day my wife said, I would like to see Eddie's gravesite. And I kind of stepped back and I said, I haven't been there since the first angry visit where I stood over his grave and cursed. And she said, I want to go. You need to go. So we did. And when we pulled up to the grave marker and I got out of the car, the pent-up bitterness, the pent-up anger, and the pent-up guilt just exploded. I began to weep, tears running down my face, which turned into sobs, just deep grief and sobs. I couldn't even stand up. And my wife had her arm around me, but I'm telling you, it felt like the arm of an angel. And immediately I felt the peace, and I felt the anger was gone, and the bitterness was gone.
Years after he internalized the unhelpful advice of a pastor to hide his emotions from his grieving mother, Tate discovered a new calling, one that would require him to revisit those emotions and transform his life forever.
What had eventually kind of allowed my mom to start pulling out of her grief was she started seeing a Christian counselor. And I was able to see firsthand the difference that it made in her life as she saw this counselor. And I began thinking, if it makes that much of a difference, maybe this is something that I want to do. One of the requirements to be a counselor was that I go through counseling myself. And so I had to go through about 8 weeks of group counseling. And out of nowhere, I just had this cathartic experience of literally 8 years of pent-up, bottled emotions, not just about my brother's death, but all the emotions I had been bottling up, just trying to stay so far away from the emotions of my brother's death that everything just came out all at once, as if 500 tons of weight had been lifted off of my shoulders.
Moving forward in your grief journey isn't only a matter of receiving help from others. Giving help to others, as you are able, will also help you with a renewed vision of your future.
The purpose of life is to love God and love others. And in the middle of my grief, all I want is relief. Given what I'm going through, is there ever going to be any hope that I'm going to be able to care about somebody else? Now that seems almost impossible when you're in profound grief. And God says, no, it's possible. I put my Holy Spirit within you. You're going to be able to care about somebody else, and that's going to be the key to your healing.
My grief doesn't end with my comfort. This moment is not just about where can I find help for me and that's it. Because God wants me to look beyond my grief to the grief of others. and realize that if I've found comfort, then I have something to offer others.
When I felt like I didn't have a purpose, it was hard. And then I think shortly after that is when I started getting involved with Grief Share. And I was like, okay, it's a little bit of a purpose helping others.
There was a woman who had just started coming to Grief Share. I don't remember what her loss was, but she was crying and not, just so sad. I just kind of put my arm around her shoulder and just let her cry. And that was another turning point for me. To be there as a support for her was a huge step for me. And it just lifted my heart to be able to give to somebody else.
Once I found the church and felt all of that love, I stopped feeling as isolated, and I started to laugh again. And I started to be able to help more people because I was happy, and helping people brought me even more joy. My sorrow got turned into something a lot bigger and a lot greater than what I could have ever imagined.
After 14 years of marriage, Mike's wife, Linda, died of brain cancer, and he found himself stuck in grief.
I knew I was grieving, but I went past the grieving and just was feeling sorry for myself. And I used to call them pity parties, felt, oh, poor old me, why is it me? I'm the only bad one, having something wrong. But I realized that's not what I was supposed to be doing. And I asked God to forgive me. And the reason I asked God to forgive me was I could have been helping other people.
Now Mike works to help others heal from and avoid getting stuck in grief.
I know I'd lost my wife and my life had changed, but I knew that God still had something for me, as He does for everybody.
If you struggle with recurring negative thoughts, we encourage you to work through your participant guide this week. Look for the exercise on how to recognize and correct unhelpful thinking. And take time to evaluate any false beliefs you may have about the grief process. Your Healing Through Writing journal prompts will be coming to a close soon, but you can continue healing through writing with Reflections, a guided journal by Grief Share. This guided journal asks questions that help you work through difficult thoughts and feelings. And the pages offer plenty of space to write. You can also store your cherished memories in the journal and track your healing progress. Order your copy today at griefshare.org/journal. Did you know that you can access never-before-seen Grief Share videos at home? Visit griefshare.org to watch bonus videos from both experts and testimonials, as well as helpful articles and additional resources to help you manage your grief.
When we forget that God is a God of hope, that there's meaning and purpose in our lives, we do very tragic things.
For a while, I was thinking there really is no point in planning the future because it could change for all of us just like that.
When my sister-in-law died, I realized many other wishes may not come true as well. That realization took me into a hopeless place.
Hope is what keeps us going. The question then becomes, what do we place our hope in?
Every grief journey is different. There's no definite timeline to anticipate. And the possible ruts you might encounter will not necessarily be the ruts others encounter. So it's important to be aware of the possible ruts along your path through grief. That will enable you to move forward without unnecessary delays. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to talking to you next time.